All right, so in this video, I'm gonna give you 5 tips on how to make painting glass a lot easier. Hello, everybody. If you're new to the channel, then welcome to Paint Coach. My name is Chris Fornatero, and I'm here to help simplify oil painting so that you can get better faster. So I painted this Patron bottle as a demonstration on my Patreon page, so I thought it'd be helpful to make a YouTube video on painting glass. Now, if you stay tuned to the end of this video, I have a bonus tip on how I did the lettering on the bottle, which I've gotten a lot of people asking how to do that. So I got a helpful little tip for you on that at the end. Okay, let's jump on in with tip number 1, which is put in your background or your surroundings first. Because a lot of what's happening inside the glass in terms of all those colors and shapes is dictated by what's happening outside around the glass, because glass is transparent or translucent, and it's going to be reflecting a lot of colors that are around it. So in the Patron bottle, I actually put in the background and the ground first because I knew I was going to be seeing a lot of those colors within the glass itself. It's also just going to help me compare all of the values and colors that I'm going to put into the bottle. The only way you're gonna get this effect of glass is if all the shapes and values are working together correctly. If the shapes and values are just a little bit off, they're not gonna be working together and have that cohesive look to give that effect of clear glass with reflections and light and all that fun stuff. Now, just because I'm putting in the background and the ground first doesn't mean that I'm not going to adjust it later on. Anything is up for adjustment at any point in time during the painting, but it's good to have something there as, a starting point to start bouncing other colors and values off of. Also, don't be afraid to paint the background over your drawing of the subject. Like when I painted this jar of lemonade, I knew that the shapes that make up the edges or outer rim of the top of the jar were small enough that I could come back in with paint over top of the background. So I just put the whole background in and then went back over top with thicker paint to put in those edges and reflections and everything to indicate the top of the jar. But see, at the bottom of the jar where the lemonade was, I knew that was too big of a shape and too much of a jump in color and value to try and paint over later on. As you get more experience with painting, you'll develop a better sense of when to paint over things and when to paint around them. All right, tip number 2 is try and simplify the glass into as big of shapes as possible and as few of colors as possible. For this Patron bottle, I broke it down into about 3 shapes with only 2 colors. And doing that is going to help you better judge the smaller shapes and values you put within those big shapes. A big problem I see beginners do is they try and jump straight to those smaller shapes, and they get so focused on making each of those shapes different in color and value, and they're not looking at the big picture. And what ends up happening is they make all those smaller shapes too different in color, too different in value, and when they step back, they're not working together because they haven't been grouped into general colors and values. I always say start big and work small. It'll make painting a lot easier. All right, tip number 3 is move around the painting as much as possible, especially at the beginning. When you start putting in these smaller shapes, you don't want to develop one area too far too fast, because you need to be comparing all the different shapes and values that you're putting in. Remember, the only way you're going to make this read as glass is if all these shapes and values are working together in the right way. And you're only going to know that they're working together in the right way if you're constantly comparing them. And in order for you to compare them, they have to be there. You have to be able to step back and looking at all these shapes and comparing the values and adjusting and making sure it's all working. Now, a tip to help you with this, whenever you mix up a color for a certain shape, try and find everywhere else in the glass that has that color. This will keep all your colors and shape in harmony as you develop the painting. All right, tip number 4 is value is way more important than color. Now I know I say this with pretty much every video, but with this glass, it is very important. It's so important that in this painting, I actually put down the brightest highlight that there is just to have as a reference point. I was totally willing to scrape this off or paint over it if I had to. I ended up not having to, but I wanted to get that down as a reference point for all my other values. Because if I put that down, like I know that is definitely the lightest value and everything else needs to work in comparison to that. I used it as a key. So if I had put that highlight down and it didn't seem to pop and it didn't seem very bright, that would have indicated to me that I didn't have enough darks and that I needed to push my darks a little more, because that light is only gonna be as light as the darks are around it. And once I put that highlight in, it did make me see that I needed to adjust to some of my values. All right, tip number 5 is be prepared to do a lot of adjusting. You know, you got all these colors and shapes in there, and a lot of times if you change one color or value, you're gonna have to change a whole bunch of others. And that's completely normal. And a lot of times it's helpful to paint into a color and to change that color on the canvas instead of trying to just paint over it with thick paint. You know, this connects to a lot of the other tips that I've talked about here. It connects to the values and the background. You know, I had to alter and change my background. You really can't be precious with any part of the painting. You can't think, oh man, I don't want to have to repaint that or change that or alter that. You got to be willing to change anything at any time. All right, now time for the bonus tip, which has to do with lettering. Anytime you have to, write out letters, like on this bottle, I had to write out Patron and all this lettering and everything. And I found that an easy way to go about doing that is to use the back of your brush and to scrape it in first. That way, if you mess up a letter, it's very easy to just rub it with your finger and kind of smear the paint a little bit and then try it again. It's a lot easier to fix than if you were just going straight with paint. So you do it first by scraping in with the back of your brush, and then that acts as a guide for when you come back in with a really small brush and do the lettering. All right, hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't miss out on anything Paint Coach related by subscribing to the Paint Coach newsletter. I got the link to that in the description below. And if you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.